All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in for this week's installment of Difficult Conversations, brought to you by hashtag Supply the Why. I am your host, Dean Jenkins, and I have a very special guest today. State Representative candidate Ms. Tamisha Civil will be sharing some of her thoughts. So, Tamisha, if you could just go ahead and introduce yourselves and maybe let people know how you found me and what made you decide to reach out to me.
Okay, great. Thank you, Din, first of all, for inviting me, for listening to me and allowing me to giving me the opportunity to speak with you today. I first was scrolling through my Facebook page, and then I know with the whole Black Lives Matter, it has sparked a lot of young people in our community to speak up about racism in our country and what's happening all over different states and cities and communities. So I was like, wow, this is, I like what I hear, and this is a great opportunity to reach out to you to see if we can have a conversation. Because I know you and I, we work in criminal justice background, and I can tell you a little bit about myself. And I felt that this would be from our perspective to have a conversation and to engage, because sometimes when we have difficult conversations, it may be easier for me and you to talk about our experiences, but there are a lot of people who want to have conversations, difficult conversations at that, but they may not know how to go about it. They may not know what to say. They may be afraid of saying the wrong thing when they actually have good intentions. So I felt that it was important for me to have a conversation with you, especially someone who was looking to run for state representative in the 6th Norfolk District. So that's why I wanted to come on your platform to just talk about what's going on and how we can make a difference together, because whether people want to believe it or not, we need each other to move forward. Absolutely. And when people hear about state representative, I don't know if young people know the impact that state representatives have. So to educate our young people and those who are tuning in, the duties of a state representative is to introduce votes on bills that represent the interests of the constituents, you and I, and people that are living in the communities, such as 6th Norfolk District would be Stoughton, Canton, and Avon. People who live in the voting district. They create new laws, modify or update old laws, and serve on a research committee within the legislative branch. So it is important for me to say that, because if we want to make a change and better our community for everyone, then these are the things that we need to know, the importance of voting. So I just wanted to put that out there. But just a little bit about me. I'm a first Haitian generation to graduate from college. I have a bachelor's degree in marketing from Johnson & Wales University. I have a master's degree in criminal justice and leadership from Northeastern University. And I attended high school at Dover Sherborne Regional High School, which is a METCO program, is when inner city, because I was born in Boston, inner city kids that go to suburban schools to get a better education. It was such a good opportunity for me. That's why I'm so passionate about education, because I feel that if we have a strong community, then we should be able to strengthen our education system, where students don't have to venture off to different communities to get the best education that they can get. And after I worked in the financial industry for about 10 years as a customer service support, helping people with retirements. I did that for about 10 years, working with them and explaining to them the importance of a pension, 401k plan, et cetera, et cetera. And then after, 10 years in the financial industry, I felt that I had more to give. I didn't want to sit behind a desk for 8 hours. I wanted to give back to my community based on all the experience that I've gained throughout my years. So I got my master's degree. Then I went off to work for the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office as a victim witness advocate. So as an advocate, what I do is I advocate for anyone who has been impacted by a crime. whether it's financial crime, whether it's robbery, domestic violence. I was there to advocate with them alongside the assistant district attorney's office. So what that was for me, I worked in various different courts, such as Dorchester Court, Roxbury Court, South Boston Court, and Superior Court was my last stop. And I worked in courts, sitting in the courtrooms along with my advocate to make sure that they have all the resources, but they are aware of what's happening with the case that they're a victim in. I would make sure that I provide, any kind of resources that would help them continue their life after a traumatic experience. So that was a wonderful job. It was awakening for me because I did not experience certain things that were exposed dealing with people who are impacted by crime. It was like a light bulb. It was showing me how, how I was blessed enough to understand and help people who are less fortunate than me. And after working as a victim witness advocate, I wanted to do more. So I transitioned to a new position, which is an associate probation officer with the Mass Probation Services. So what I do is I help people rehabilitate back into their community. So if they're on probation for an OUI, drinking under the influence, or a drug offense, or whatever the case may be, I would help them make sure that they do all the programming and following their probation guidelines for that 1 year period. And that is sitting in the courtroom, helping the judge, helping them get all the necessary tools that they need to make sure that they successfully complete their probation period. And I did that, and I'm also a legal advocate for domestic violence shelter, where I help women who are battered, women and children who have been battered by their spouse, boyfriend, or their living partner. So my life has been advocating for people and talking to people. And that is the importance for me being here, to letting people know that we need to have conversations, because everybody's being impacted many different ways. And how important is it to get the response that we need? And then,
Tamisha, so if I could just jump in for a second, because that's a lot. That's a lot to digest you threw at us there. Clearly, you're a very, very busy woman, and you got a lot of irons in the fire, and you have some skin in the game, which is great. So why don't I transition that to all of that you're doing, because you're out there, you're making a difference, and you're trying to reach people. So what role do you think that you, as an elected government official, play in the process of having these difficult conversations that we so desperately need in society today? Be it, police relations, or police and citizen relations, or race relations. So what do you think your role is in that?
Well, my role is, I think my role is to listen to people. I think we need to have these difficult conversations because it's long overdue. There's a lot of things happening into this world, and we need to help people to understand why. We need to help and educate and communicate. As someone who's running, I think it's important to listen, because if we're not listening, then we can't understand the problem.
Sure.
You know what I mean? We need to understand different viewpoints that people give people the opportunity to speak. And understand that it may be an uncomfortable conversation to have, but it's important. And that plays a big part because, people, you and I, when you're working in law enforcement and any local government official position, it's power. You know what I mean? So power holds weight. We've heard the phrase that says, see something, say something. So that's the same thing. When we see racism, we see discrimination of all kinds, we need to say something. We need to be able to nip it in the bud right then and there, and then have a conversation that this is wrong. How can we talk about it and bring everyone at the table? Not just me and you having a conversation, but bringing all local officials into a room and saying, okay, we have a problem here. What is the right solution? What are the steps that we're going to do to make sure that people in our community are comfortable and that they know that they are safe? Because we hold a lot of weight. We say, and I just told you what the role of a state representative is, and a role of a law enforcement holds a lot of power. We know that. So we need to come together and we need to sit down at a table and have open and honest discussion and truthful, honest discussion. Because if we don't have these discussions, then we start hiding the truth. Local officials have responsibilities to represent all constituents and to address social, economic challenges that minority and everyone in the community jurisdiction face. So these are important things to have conversations about.
All right. So, point well taken. Well, let's look at this from a different point of view. So, one of the, some of what you brought up there was, in cases of clear racial injustice and, that we need to speak up and have a voice. But let me ask you a question from the flip side of the coin here, where what if there is a situation, because you are in law enforcement, or you have a law enforcement, you're connected to it. What happens when there is a case that is justified or is objectively reasonable and people are calling it a racially motivated incident? How are you going to address that when you and I both know that because you and we have more training than the average person, and maybe we know a little bit more about how the proper protocols should work in that situation? How would you handle having that conversation when the officer, it seems like you want to talk about police because we're out there, we're kind of low-hanging fruit, and that's cool, it's cool. But if it is a police-related event, because chances are that's what people are going to be looking at, how would you handle that if it was a justified act that just happened to be between a police officer of one race and a subject of a different race? Talk a little bit about that.
That's a great question. I've worked, like I told you, I worked in the district attorney's office where I'm working with assistant district attorneys. I meet officers day in and day out. There's not a day that I don't work with a police officer. We work hand in hand in order for us to strengthen cases. There is reasonable doubt. There is witnesses, there are facts, there are protocols we need to follow. So when you bring all these evidence to play and people in the community don't really know what's going in the back office, then that's when you need to have a meeting or having a public announcement to bring out all the facts to make sure that everybody is aware of what's going on and that everything aligns together. I've been in situations where, it may look race related, but honestly, it's not. But how do we make people in our community comfortable? It's by educating. We tell them step by step that this is what happened. This is how we went about it. And this is how we will resolve the issue, or how we're going about it. One of the things is that for a state representative, it's important to have public hearings. And that's when you invite constituents to the forefront to let them know this is what is happening in our legislative system. We want you to know, and we want you to speak up and tell us if it's something that you are agreeable to or you're not. So I think where the disconnect is that we don't have enough officials or public officials coming in to talk about the situation, because they may have a reason for not coming out to the public as far as the case. And, they don't want to cause any tension to an ongoing investigation. But I think some kind of communication piece where we can explain to people in our community, this is what happened, this is the fact, and show all the proper steps of the event that occurred, and then go about it this way. As long as we know that our job, we're doing it honest and truthful, and we have paper trail to back it up, then I think our communities will understand and respect that.
Excellent answer. Really quick, I just want to welcome Nancy and Karen. I see that you've jumped on. Please know that this is an open forum, so if you have questions for Tamisha, please go ahead and and type them into the chat box, and I will get to them as soon as possible. And Steve, obviously that goes for you as well. So the next question that I had for you, Tamisha, was how would you describe your vision as to what the role is and how in depth local officials should be getting in these difficult conversations, like the process of having these?
Okay,
when do you say how much is too much?
You're right. How much is too much? And we're still learning that day by day. But when we have people who are affected by it, who are being killed, then we just need to go forward and try to find a better mechanism of keeping people in the know. I mean, my vision is to be proactive, not reactive. Proactive meaning being able to speak to people, have conversations that are uncomfortable, like we're talking about, and just letting people know that local officials have the seat at the table. We need to include local officials to have a seat at the table and talk about the problems and respond to a solution collectively. I can't not do it by myself alone. I don't attend doing anything by myself. If I was to become the state representative, I think when we work collectively, we become a stronger force. And I think that, we need to be honest with ourselves. We do have a problem. We do have, racism exists, not, even though our country is impacted by racism, but that doesn't mean we need to be racist. You know what I mean? So I think that when we're working with local officials, they need to have a seat at the table, and we need to speak to each and every one of them and come with a census. Hey, we have a problem. What are we going to do? How we're going to change it? What are the steps? What is it that the people need to do to get your attention? So it's a collaborative effort, and the local officials need to listen to the people of the community because they're the voice. They're the ones with the power, voting people in office. They're the ones in power that are the ones that making sure that, people like me and you should be held accountable for the things that we say we're going to do that we don't do. So I think when we allow constituents to have more of a voice and listen to them, then we are able to make some kind of progress. If that answers your question.
It does. It does. So what I am, so for every action is a reaction. So I'm going to react to what you just said. And again, you went back to the case of there being, what appears to be clear-cut racism. So, and I'm gonna ask you a question right back.
You're gonna play devil's advocate with me?
Of course, I'm gonna play devil's advocate because as you mentioned, that is also our jobs. Especially, yes. I don't know exactly like your ins and outs, but especially my job. And I see that another gentleman just jumped on here who's also a police officer. Our job sometimes is to tell people exactly what it is. So my point is, there's absolutely racism. I don't see how any intelligent person can say that racism does not exist at some levels. However, sometimes people of different races just don't like each other and just don't get along, and it's not racially motivated. It's just the way it is. Sometimes people just don't like each other. It's the person that they don't like as opposed to the color of their skin. So I guess if you're going to be in the state representative role, would you also take the responsibility of telling people, hey, listen, nothing appears to be racially motivated here. It just, this person did this action, which caused this reaction. And that's just what it was. Would you feel comfortable doing that? Because I know that is, you want to talk about a difficult conversation. Try talking to your family members about something like that, trying to tell them that, it might not be racially motivated. It might just be a set of circumstances that played out because two human beings had a situation and that's the way it worked out. So talk a little bit about that, Tamisha.
So it is difficult. It is difficult to, I think it is difficult, but we do need to start having policies in place that gives people, I feel like people think they're so privileged. They think they can say or do things to people. For me, the way I was raised. What
specifically are you talking about? You said people. Huh? You said people feel that they're so.
Well, no, like you said that. what I'm talking about is whether it's not race related, some people feel that just because of who they are, their stature, their economic status, they feel that they can say anything to anyone just because they feel superior. And what I'm saying is that that is wrong. And we do need to have policies in place where we hold people accountable for their actions, where if you say something, people need to start being mindful what they say. You may not respect or understand what I'm saying, but that doesn't give you the right to dehumanize me. That doesn't give you a right, because to me, it's not about Republican or Democrat. It's not about black and white. It's about how we can get together to solve these issues that we are facing and come collaboratively. We need to be able to have these conversations. And the difficult conversations, there are people who don't know how to express themselves. There are people who just saying what comes off the top of their mind. But there needs to know they need to know that there can be consequences for what you say without understanding what you're saying first, because we're dealing with people. Everybody has different viewpoints. Everyone has different ideas. I went to an all white high school. People's views were different, but what I had to learn is to speak up for myself, but in a way where people can understand. You know, I had to speak up and be mindful how I say it. I know people get angry. I know people get flared up because of issues and policies that is dear to their heart, but that doesn't give me the right to talk to you a certain way because you feel that I'm wrong. So I think if there's policies that will hold people accountable on how they say it, because people right now, I think, people they're starting to put things into play where, say, for example, Karen at New York Park, who called police on an innocent black man. They're charging her for a misdemeanor for making a false claim. So these are all things that can be put into place to let people know you cannot just say anything and get away with it. That's just not, that's a form of a threat. So I think people need to be mindful of how they say things and understand that we may not have the same ideas, but you have to respect me at the same time.
All right. I love that last part, Tamisha, about holding people accountable for their actions. One of the things that I would love to see happen, and again, this is just my opinion, I would love to see some sort of legislation come out for false reporting of a crime where the sentence that you get for false reporting of the crime should be right on par with the crime that you're alleging. So for example, if you allege that I stole the Snickers, then that's the crime, that's the sentence that you would get. If you allege that somebody raped you and it's false, that's the sentence you should get. That crime needs to have a lot more teeth to it than it has now, because right now, like you said, there's very little consequences for people alleging false crimes and making false reports. It's really just a slap on the wrist, a light slap at that.
And to piggyback on what you're saying is, you know, and I know when someone files the charges, it is the right of the police officer to write it down and bring it to the district attorney's office to bring charges on someone and file a criminal complaint. And that goes on to that person's record. Now, we all know when something goes on someone's record, how difficult it is to be removed. Now, when someone files a false claim on someone, like, that's an injustice to someone else, that you're putting a claim that is falsely on their record, which can potentially cause them not to get a job or not to be able to further on with their life. And we need to do something about it because it's wrong.
100% Tamisha. So I got a question here. Nancy wants to know, do you think there is too much yelling and not enough intelligent conversation out there? So we're coming up on the end here. So let's see if you could wrap that up in about 60 seconds or so, Tamisha.
I'll try. You know what, sometimes, Nancy, yeah, if you have intelligent conversations and you keep doing it over and over again and no one's listening to you, history keeps repeating themselves, then at some point you have to yell so you can get your point across. I'm not a yeller, and I agree with you. We should not be yelling in order for us to get our point across. But when history keeps repeating themselves over and over and over, then yelling needs to be done. For an example, if we have a child, right? We have a baby, and the child says, and the child is crying, they want a bottle, and we take our time to give our child that bottle. What do we hear in that background of that crying? It gets louder, it gets louder, it gets louder until that child is fed. So I'm applying that same principle. When we are not being heard, and we've tried to work with people to make changes, to say that systematic racism is wrong, and discrimination of all form is wrong, and no one's listening to us, then yelling would have to be what we need to do in order to get that point across.
Okay, point taken. Any other last questions here before we wrap up? We're up against it. Again, we're here with State Representative candidate Tamisha Civil, and she has given us her take on what locally elected officials can do to have these difficult conversations and to facilitate them. I hear somebody yelling in the background. Anybody? Steve, you have anything? No, just listening in. Well, all right. Well, I just want to thank everybody for coming out and taking time to listen in on this is what was certainly a difficult conversation. I mean, you have, you're going to have a lot of weight on your shoulders should this work out for you, Tamisha, and you end up being elected. And so what's that old saying? Heavy is the head that wears the crown.
Well,
or the tiara, whatever you prefer, the crown or tiara, whatever you prefer.
Whatever it is, I'm just here trying to make a change. I think this year is the time to change. I think people in Stoughton deserves the right to know what is happening in the state legislation. I think I know Stoughton deserves more to just vote on just voting for someone. I think they deserve to know what's happening. I think they need to know exactly what bills are put into place, and they need to know how it affects them and their neighbors, and what is it that they can do to change. We're not having enough of these conversations, but it needs to have, and I'm ready to have these conversations with everyone in our community. I love our community. That's why I'm involved in all these activities, such as Girl Scout leadership. I'm part of the Stoughton Dot Elementary School. I have my own radio broadcast that provides organizations and leaderships a platform to talk about the resources that they provide to their community. And I'm also a commissioner for the Eastern Status of Regional Women for Women and Girls. And I'm also was part of the Stoughton Consensus Committee, the Census Committee. And lastly, I was part of the English language. I'm part of the English Language Advisory Council, which is LPAC for bilingual students in Stoughton. So it is important that here, it's not 2020 with COVID, with all these things that are happening, Black Lives Matter, we cannot just stand and watch what's happening. We need to make a change for everyone, because if we don't do that, then we will be having these conversations over and over and over, and nothing's going to change. But right now it's time to change. And I think everyone who's on the Zoom chat that came on today to listen to me and didn't, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
You can call me Dean, Tamisha. We're old friends. Dean.
I keep saying Dean, thank you so much.
Story of my life, Tamisha. Every first day of school, my whole life. Every time I made a basket or a tackle on an away game, they call me Din. So it's something I'm used to. But like again, we're friends, we're partners, we're neighbors. Just like you said, you're heavily invested in the Stoughton. My family's been out here for 44 years. So we're deeply entrenched in this town, and we both love this town, and we want what's best for it. So again, thank you everybody for taking the time to come out and spend a little time getting to know Miss Civil. Keep having these difficult conversations and stay tuned at #SupplyTheWhy. We got a whole lot more coming in the future, and let's stay open-minded. All right. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great job, Tamisha.
Thank you so much. Did I answer all your questions correctly?